Hi, friends. Welcome back to another week of the Recover Your Life podcast. My name is Bridgett, and I'll be your host. Together, we're building a community of men and women who know what it means to grieve well, rest well, and love well to live the life we dream of. I'm so glad that you decided to join us for this week's conversation. In today's episode, I sit down with Hailey Kenyon, and we're talking all things understanding God's will, people-pleasing, learning to have needs even when it's scary, all sorts of good stuff. Hailey is a speaker and content creator advocating for healing from toxic relationships. She currently holds the title of Miss Vacaville 2023 in her hometown, and for the last 6 years, she has worked in the space of digital marketing, ministry, and hospitality. She's using her own experiences and her learning from all of these industries to foster authentic and genuine connections. When she's not working, you can find Hailey at Pilates, enjoying a honey latte, and coaching high school volleyball. Cannot wait for you guys to hear today's conversation. Let's dive in. Hailey, welcome to the Recover Your Life podcast. So glad that you're here today and so grateful to have met you. So recently we were at a conference a couple weeks ago and said, I need to meet her. She is carrying just some bravery and some courage to talk about the hard things. And so excited to have you in the Recover Your Life crew today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And it's crazy that we met like right before New Year's.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like so long ago, but it was not that long ago.
I do not know where January has gone. It has been just
I know.
crazy. Time has stopped.
It has.
That's so great. Well, one of the things that you and I have been talking about that I'd love to bring our listeners in on today is kind of the idea of, especially for our generation, there was so much pressure and emphasis on finding God's will for your life. It was like, I need to know my purpose. I need to live in my calling. It is, if I don't find this one magical golden egg, right, I'm going to be just like forgotten or left behind, or I'm going to disappoint God. I think a lot of it was this pressure of like, oh my gosh, if I die and I was really supposed to be a teacher, but I was a chef, like,
Yeah.
what's gonna happen to it for eternity. And so there's been so much pressure, and I think that not even necessarily that it was taught that way specifically, but I know a lot of friends my age, like, we're in this season of life where we go, okay, cool, like all those innocent like dreams that I had about a life with God at 18, now as I'm in my late 20s, like trying to navigate life, where my one of my good friends the other day, she said, I was like a kid adult and now I'm an adult. It's like now I'm a real
Yeah.
adult.
Yeah.
That there's this space where we go, hey, like this is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. It's not as simple.
Yeah.
And at this point in my life, not even my life, but like for all of us, we most likely have faced some sort of heartache where we go, ooh, is God really who he says he is? Is this faith that I believe in really worth giving my life for? Am I really the person that I want to be? And so it brings a whole lot into question. And so I would love to just kind of start a little bit, before we dive into that question of what is God's will and how do I make that work with my life? For you to just kind of share a little bit with your listeners of who you are and maybe how were you introduced to that topic of God's will when you were in
Yeah.
middle school, high school? How was that introduced to you?
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. Like there's a lot. I think for my background, so I grew up going to a private Christian school from the time I was in preschool till when I graduated high school. And just being the best than it did about doing what Hailey wanted for her life at that time and being authentic and living out of the gifts that God had given me and out of that relationship with him. And I was living more out of trying to impress people or make my school look good. And so that probably started, I mean, in high school for sure. So like 13, 14 years old. But I can even look back on times when I was 8, 9, 10 and made decisions to please other people rather than what God was doing for me. And it all kind of like, once you like start building a life on something that doesn't align with how God truly made you, like that's not going to last. And so everything kind of came crashing down by the time I was 19. And then from there, I was like, okay, I need to really figure out what scripture says, what God's heart is around
Yeah.
this topic of God's will for my life. So
Mm.
I think it was a lot. It was a big part of who I was at the time, and I'm competitive and I'm an achiever, and so it was just it kind of the way I'm naturally wired a little bit almost like thrived off of that like pursuit of
Yeah.
whatever God's like mystical magical will was for me, and I would beat
Mm-hmm.
myself up so much if I felt like I was going to miss out on it. And it was like sometimes I
Yeah.
describe it as like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Like it seems like this thing
Mm-hmm.
that you have to like with this one thing that you have to find, and if you don't then like you got it wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit about the background on that topic for me.
Yeah, that's so great. I think the weird part about this is so funny to me because I can't bring like a specific sermon or specific teachings that I heard. I just feel like I'm watching the after effects of my friends that are, in this season of life where they're like, I'm not sure. Like, there's just a lot of pressure of like, I want a career change or I want to move somewhere different. Or there's so much fear of, is this God's will? Is this God's calling? Am I following God's calling? And one of the things as we go into this conversation, I want to clarify is we're not saying that that doesn't exist, but I think
Mhm.
there's way more space in that definition that what we've considered before. One of the things that I always like to say is like a word picture when I talk about God's calling for our life is kind of like God gives us a coloring book, but he gives us the box of crayons and says, color it whatever color you want, right? It can be blue and
Mm.
green, pink and yellow. Like it can be whatever color you want to.
Yeah.
And I think when we live from a fear based perspective, even of our ability to know God's heart, right? When you go like,
Mhm.
"Ooh, I'm not sure if I actually trust myself enough that I can hear God for me." It's the like, well, I'm
Yeah.
just going to leave this page blank because what if it was supposed to be a green tree, but I colored it blue?
Right.
Um, and so maybe I'm curious about that in your story. What was kind of the journey like from I'm not actually sure if I trust Hailey enough to make
Mhm.
decisions that are good. I probably have to outsource this to what other people think, what my leaders think, what my pastor thinks, what my parents think. These are all people that I want their input in my life. However, it's time for me to make choices that are in
Mhm.
alignment with who I want to be.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that now. Um, I think, it was such a journey. And for me, like when I mentioned that everything kind of came crashing down when I was 19, there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot there with toxic relationships, and there was some spiritual abuse where I was literally told after a breakup by a pastor, I think you're actually supposed to be with this person that had just broken up with me. And, there it could either go this way or this way. Do you want to figure it out? So it was literally like God's like will for my life was kind of presented as this riddle. And so that kind of was really damaging to me. And so I think after coming out of that and realizing what like that was not okay, those things should have never happened, should have never been said. I kind of started on this journey of like no one's going to have to like tell me what God is saying for my life because I want to be so close to him that I know. Like I know his heart, I know who he is, and I can discern better what he has for my life and for me and how he's created me and the giftings he's put in my heart and what he wants to use them for. And so really it started as first like I was already reading my Bible at the time, but just a more in-depth study about like, okay, well, what does scripture say about this idea of God's will?
Mm-hmm.
And then just through time and learning and different experiences, getting it wrong a lot of the times with my discernment and falling back into people pleasing, I really started to make some progress in this area. And a lot of it was just in spending a lot of time with the Lord, praying and worshiping and being in groups where we were, reading different books of the Bible and really studying this idea, talking to godly friends about this idea that were older than me, like, hey, what do you think about this idea of God's will? Like, I'm trying to figure it out. And just having people around me that loved me no matter what, I think was huge. And as I started to make friendships where I was showing up authentically myself, not being the girl who was trying to perform and impress and get all the accolades, but really just being me, that was
Right.
incredibly healing as well
Yeah.
because it was like, oh, I can't, well, if I paint or if I color the tree blue and it's supposed to be green, I trust God. I trust that he's a good God and he's a redeeming God, and he's going to work things out for my good in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was, building trust with myself, building trust with God. Like, God is a big God and he's got the whole world in his hands, and I can trust him with my life and trust that he cares about me. Having godly community and trying a lot of things that maybe I would have wanted to try when I was younger, and being okay, being uncomfortable and looking silly and being bad at something. For me, that was a huge way of to like discover new things about myself, and to not put that pressure on doing things just to get achievement or success,
Yeah.
which was just really arbitrary and kind of feels like you're chasing a mirage. Like, once you get
Mm-hmm.
there, it's not the end goal.
Yeah. And I think that's really powerful. It reminds me, even just this past weekend, I was thinking about, some authors that I really admire or speakers I really admire. And I was like, oh, like, I would feel really sad if they weren't brave enough to write. Like, I'm so grateful that they
Mm.
chose to be vulnerable and share that. And no matter what your skill
Wow.
is, whether it's a, you know, fitness program, or like there's a woman that I follow online that she makes oral wellness stuff. So she makes tooth powders and like organic, like
Oh,
healthcare
wow.
things. And it's like, I'm so grateful that she's brave like that. I'm thankful for the therapist that I follow that get on a cell phone and record a selfie video teaching us how to be healthy humans, or whether that's a clip of how to garden well or how to save money at Costco, or literally like whatever it is.
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm just so grateful that they show up. And I think there's this space where we kind of those two paradigms that you're talking about is when I'm perfect and I'm high achieving and I do what everyone expects of me, there's a lot of praise that comes back, and it gives us
Mm-hmm.
a lot of belonging, which we're made to
Yeah.
belong.
Yeah.
But it's really easy to be like, okay, well, what's the cultural expectation of this
Yeah.
space? And I'll just go do, I've done it too, right? I'll just go do
Yeah.
that, be that in order to be
Mm-hmm.
accepted, compared to the other, kind of the other lens, which is, yeah, there's some really incredible things about me. And I don't think that's selfish to say that. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
we're so honoring to the Lord to say, no, I am a really good writer. And that when the books I bring into the world make it a more beautiful place. Or, no, I am really great at gardening or, nutritional education, or whatever it may be. Like, when I show up in the room, it creates space for everyone to live a more beautiful life. But that's a
Yeah.
really scary question to ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, even as you've talked about this idea of, I kind of hear the question beneath the question is, you gave yourself permission to go, oh, what do I want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's huge because when you're people pleasing so much, you never ask that question. So I remember 2 years ago vividly, I had a mentor ask me that question because I was like struggling in some kind of work relationship. And she was like, well, what do you want? And I had no idea. I was so out of touch with, I was like, well, that doesn't matter. And then I think sometimes we sweep it under like the Jesus rug, because it's so
Oh,
easy
yeah.
to be like, oh, but it doesn't matter what I want because it's all about what God wants. And then
Mm-hmm.
so it's like you've made God this same person that you're like people pleasing, but he's like, no, I made everything about you and I love you and I've given you free will and permission to go and have dominion over the earth in some area. And like when you're so into that people pleasing cycle, it's that neglecting of what you want and how you were created and living an aligned whole life. Like, that question can is so stumping. And so I think that's the question that it like really we have to get to the bottom to, and give ourselves permission to get to the bottom to, and realize that it's not selfish, like you were saying.
Yeah. What do you think people pleasing like gave you?
What
What
it
need
gave
was it
me,
meeting? Like, yeah, like what need was it
um
meeting?
yeah, my first thought was like, it gave me nothing. I have nothing to show
Mm-hmm.
for it. But I think at the time it gave me, it was the way that um I felt like I was living a purpose life if I
Wow.
was pleasing other people, or if I was jumping on board with like this team or this job or this role. And then it was kind of like neglecting maybe the purpose that God had put in my life, because it was
Mm-hmm.
so easy to just like if I'm pleasing this person, if I'm doing well, I have confidence that I can show up into any job or any environment and do well. So it kind of filled that like, oh, I have a purpose, I have a belonging, I have a team, I'm accepted. Um, I think that's kind of the gist of it, is it really is tied back to purpose.
Yeah. That's amazing. I
Mm,
love the way that you said that. It reminded me, there's a passage in the first couple chapters of Song of Solomon in the Passion Translation
mm,
where she's talking to her lover and she's embarrassed and she's like, "Hey, like I'm, I'm gonna put it in the Bridgett translation is like, I'm really sunburnt." And she's like, I'm
mm,
really sunburnt. My skin is really like wrinkly because I've been out in the sun all the time because I've been taking care of these men's vineyards that's not mine. And it's just
wow.
this moment of I'm really tired. It's like I always thought, well, like cool, I'll show up and I'll prove. And in
Hmm.
that situation, I
Yep.
love, you know, especially for women in our culture of like, oh, let me just prove my worth to men, right? Because in the way that our
Yep.
culture is set up, is there's a lot of like, well, who do you need to please to get what you need?
Yep.
Like if I need
Exactly.
attention, I need financial support, I need the raise. And so there's this place of like, but it costs you because you end up exhausted going, okay, I've done
Hmm.
all this stuff for everybody else. And obviously it can be the same, men experience that too. But I like that passage
Right.
where she's just like feeling the shame of like, ooh, I want to be loved, I want to be cared for, I want to have a partner that actually works in this vineyard with me, but I've been so busy taking care of everybody else's, I don't even know what that is.
Right.
Um, I guess my next question for you is, as you've gotten more clear about who you are,
Mhm.
and I think the lie that people pleasing tells us is you won't help other people or you'll be so focused on yourself that you won't. What has you getting brave and stepping into who God's called you to be created space for you to honor the gifts and callings of those around you?
Mm. I think, wow, that's a lot. I'm trying to think of like specific examples, but I think one of the biggest gifts that I received out of friendships that I'm now able to give to them is like people just want to be accepted and seen for who
Yeah.
they are. And so I think being able to show up, like truly show up, and not in a fake way of like just God's change in my heart to really see people and love people and want nothing
Mhm.
from them. Because actually, I've seen a lot of stuff recently. Matthias J. Barker, he's like a really
Yeah.
popular therapist on Instagram. He's been putting out a lot of stuff about people pleasing being just as manipulative as like narcissistic traits. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes, like a lot of times with people pleasing, we're like, oh, I just care so much about everybody else. And it's like, no, it's actually kind of manipulative. And so I think for my journey, I can look back on the work that God's done in my heart, and to be able to show up into environments and truly see people for who they are and love them. Like, that's what people are looking for. Like, that's why we need Jesus. Like, out of his love is him laying down his life. And so when we get to be able to be a part of that with co-heirs with Christ, and we're able to just show up, and all you really need is to love people and see them and validate their experiences and their feelings. That goes a really long way. And I think
Absolutely.
just being able to empower other people as well, not be judgmental, and
Mhm.
champion people in their journey goes way farther than any kind of like, you know, thing that people pleasing would get. I don't know if that sounds kind of vague.
Yeah.
I think, because in people pleasing, there's usually some kind of if I please this person, like you said, then I'm going to get the raise, then I'm going to get this, I'm going to get more influence. Like when you can have relationship with people and not get anything out of them other than companionship and friendship and the beauty of like a genuine relationship, that's hard, and that's very countercultural because we're all trying to get somewhere and do something. And um, so I think kind of like coming off of that ladder of trying to climb to the top and just being with people, not only is that a gift to them, but it nourishes our own souls when we can just
Mhm.
be. And I think we do need more of that in our culture because it is so go 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 all the time, and that's in the church and the Christian culture too. Like that's not
Yeah.
just a secular thing.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, I think there's space where we go, hey, people pleasing is not the same thing as people honoring, right?
Right.
Or people
Right.
loving, right? And so
Right.
we are allowed to say no thank you, or to say
Hmm.
this is what I need. But it's scary, right? It's scary when we all have needs for connection and identity and
Hmm.
belonging and assurance, and to know that we matter. And so a really quick band-aid is this people pleasing thing that's like, oh my gosh, if I'm just the best person in the room, if I'm just the person that always, I was thinking about this yesterday of, one of the things that we idolize in the church is volunteers who always say yes,
Yep.
of like, oh my gosh, like Mike is here every day till every Sunday from 6 a.m. till 8 p.m. He never says no. He
Hmm.
never takes a vacation day. Great job, Mike. And I
Hmm.
just go, oh, like, does Mike know that we love him? And that if
Yeah.
he decides to go on vacation, or he decides to say, hey, I'm just going to sit in my pajamas and watch church online today because I've just had a really hard week with some stuff I
Hmm.
was dealing with my family, that today I just couldn't get up and go, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and if there isn't, and I, as I've led volunteer teams over the years, like one of the things I always tell volunteers, and this works for a lot of different contexts, is like, if you don't say no to me, you will resent me really fast.
Yeah.
Has to be. And I think it's the same with God, of
Hmm.
I need to be able to tell God, not right now, right? So it's that practicing. You talked about that discernment of, maybe you're at a coffee shop and you feel this like stirring in your belly to compliment someone, or just reach out and just build connection of like, hey, this person looks really lonely and I'd love to buy their coffee, or just something like that. And you feel it in your gut and you're like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm supposed to do this, but I feel really scared. What if it's not God? What if it is God? What if I walk? And there's like all this, stirring thing that happens. And I think one of the really cool things that is, God gives us so much space to grow with him. And so to be able to
Hmm.
say, hey, like, if I say no to this, God's not going to hate me forever.
Right.
But God also wants to help me process the fear of like, is it a fear of looking stupid? Or is it fear of not being perfect, or fear of being rejected? Like,
Hmm.
what's happening with it? It's not just to like, oh, let's just say no and move on and never talk about it again. But I like,
Hmm.
ooh, what's leading to that space?
Right.
And so it's scary, right? You're good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think, even with that example, and kind of what we've been talking about, what's God's will for my life, like everything is so high stakes. Like we just put really high stakes on
Mm-hmm.
buying the girl coffee, not buying the girl coffee. Like if
Yeah.
everything is that extreme of, okay, if I can't go on a date unless I know I'm going to marry this person. Well, how are you going to know you're going to marry them unless you go on a date?
Yeah.
Like everything is just very high stakes, very intense. And I
Mm-hmm.
really don't think that's like an accurate representation of who
Yeah.
Jesus is. Like Jesus walked with people, he ate with them, he sat with them, he spent time with them. Like he wasn't in a rush. He wasn't trying to get to the next place as quickly as he could. Like, I think Jesus really took time to evaluate his needs and to, really live in community. And so, with that, I mean, kind of like jumping to another thought, it goes back to it's just not as high stakes. Like, it's really not
Yeah.
like your life does not end. God doesn't hate you, like you were saying. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when we can just have that perspective of like, it's not that big of a deal if I don't serve this week, if I don't serve this month, it's not that big of a deal. And building trust with ourselves too. Like I know myself, I know my character, I know I'm going to work through whatever this is and serve when I can and give myself
Yeah.
space and permission to do that.
Well, I think it's a lot about knowing who you are, because people
Yeah,
pleasing is, I don't know who I am, so I need to impress people enough for them to tell me who I am.
exactly. Yeah.
Right? So if I need to say that I'm a committed church member, or I am worthy of praise when I have perfect, even like, I feel pain. I was just thinking about this. I have friends that have kids, about how they still give out perfect attendance awards.
Oh
And
gosh.
so they feel pain about that, because yes, I want kids to be inspired to go to school, and that's important. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
just going to stay home and play video games, but
Right.
I want one thing my mom did really well when I was young was like, I had permission to say, I don't feel well, I'm not going to school. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, some days it was I was up with the flu all night, very sick. And other times it was like, I am so beyond tired. My body hurts. I don't feel well. I'm going to stay home and rest. And I was able to honor what my body needed at a really young age, to be able to
Wow.
show up and say, like, no, I am someone, like, I am responsible. I don't need
Yeah.
teachers to tell me I'm responsible. Like, I am responsible. So I do my homework. I show up to school. I'm kind to people, right? If there's conflict, I'm going to ask a teacher for help. And so I wasn't looking for some outside thing in that, situation
Mm.
to confirm that. But being able to say, like, who am I? Am I someone
Mhm.
who, right? Because I think one of the things that people have fear about when we say it's not that big of a deal is sometimes people interpret that as well, people are just going to sit around on their couch their whole life and not do anything. Like, if we're
Right.
going to get people to do good, we have to discipline them.
Mhm.
And I disagree. Like,
Yeah,
I just
totally.
disagree. I
I
think
yeah.
that when we create space for people to be who they really are, that
Mhm.
is inspiration enough to move, because when you're
Yep.
affirmed in your calling, you want to do good. You want to honor yourself. You want to honor others. You want to make an impact, instead of having it be this, like, oh my gosh, if you don't, you know, make $1 million or work out every day or whatever, whatever the standard of perfection is in the situation you're facing,
Mhm.
you're going to end up as someone that you don't want to be.
Right. Yeah, and
And
that's the scariest thing
mhm,
to me. Like, that's what I feel like that's enough to drive me to continue to push and be uncomfortable in those areas because I've been there at a young age, and it's like that just is not that's not a fun place to be, you know?
and so, you know, a big part of this is allowing ourselves to have real tangible needs,
Yeah.
even when we're facing a situation and we go, I know that I know that I know that God invited me to participate in this experience, whether that's a
Mm.
relationship or a job or a city that you want to move to, right? Church that you're a part of, whatever it is. You go, no, like, I really know that God called me here. There's something, one of my
Mhm.
college professors would always say, I know it in my knower, right? I know it in my knower
I
that God invited me to this. Um,
Mm.
but that doesn't mean that I have to abandon myself in
Yeah.
order to honor that. And so it's going to look like of, I'm curious, you talked about, being asked the question, what do you want? How did the question, what do you need, play into play?
Ooh. I think that one has been more recent for me
Hmm.
because sometimes with people pleasing, you can trick yourself into thinking you have no needs and you're
Hmm.
like, "Oh, I don't need anything. Like I'm chill, I'm go with the flow." And so I think it really wasn't until this last year where I realized like my need for like my deep need to feel emotionally safe in a workplace even where
Yep.
I'm volunteering and a friend in friendships and romantic relationships, like that need is huge. And I think
Hmm.
for a long time I didn't realize that need. And, at Heart of Dating conference where we met, I shared about, my broken engagement in 2023.
Yeah.
And I think wasn't until I realized like, oh, not only am I just like bypassing and abandoning myself, but I'm putting myself in danger and in harm.
Yep.
And so
Mm.
after coming out of that, it was kind of like this, okay, let me really understand and give myself permission to have not only wants, but needs and non negotiables. And
Yep.
the biggest thing really has been that emotional safety. And I need to feel seen and I need to feel loved. And, there's some stuff in my past that maybe, there's certain things I can't do. Like I cannot do anger. I can't do extreme discipline. Like I'm just not
Mm.
wired to be able to handle that well. And just being okay with that and realizing that, not everyone's going to be wired the same way as me, but there are going to be people who are able to meet those needs and people who aren't. And the people who aren't, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that they're horrible, awful, mean people. It just means that I can't walk with them. And that's
Hmm.
okay. And that's actually the most honoring thing for them, for me to be clear in, for it's honoring for
Yep.
them and it's honoring for myself. And so I think, unfortunately for me, it had to get to a point of like, I'm in danger.
Mm.
And now it's like I have to face the fact that I do have needs. And I think since then it really has been, it's grown my discernment, because now it's not just about wants, it's about like, what do I need? What's non-negotiable?
Yep.
And so that has actually provided even more of a solid foundation for me to start building friendships, relationships, purpose, all the things from that place of emotional safety.
Yeah, that's great. This is one of my favorite topics to work with clients on. So when I meet with people one on one, we talk a lot about like what do you need? And it's usually really overwhelming at first because we've been
Yeah.
so programmed, don't have needs. And like you said, we've lived with this perspective that it's honoring. I know
Hmm.
for me, navigating this in the romantic space in the past has looked like, well, me being honoring, right, to this person means that
Hmm.
I have to, be more quiet, put their needs before my own, like,
Hmm.
help them navigate their own, emotional regulation. But we can get to Bridgett like later.
Right.
But then bringing that to the table and saying, oh, actually, what I need to feel loved, respected, and safe are these things. And
Hmm.
I'm not willing to move on those because this is real. This is what I need. And it's
Yeah.
unkind of me to hold that information back from you. And so,
Yes.
you know, we all have a need for emotional safety, but that is going, like you said, it's
Hmm.
going to look different, right? And so, even, this morning, I was, talking to someone I work for, and we were having this conversation, and we both kind of felt our energy get like really activated because we were getting a little
Mm.
frustrated of like, oh, this topic feels really painful and we're missing information. And we both kind of took this moment where we're like, oh, I feel my body escalating, right? Because we're
Mm.
both responding from our narrative of pain. And so being able to slow down
Yeah.
felt really kind of like, no, like there are so many people that, whether that's in a family setting, a workplace setting, like I'm talking about, a romantic setting, that there are people that want to say, oh, hey, like, what do you need? Like, do you
Hmm.
need a little bit of space? I feel like I misunderstood you. I'd love to know what I'm missing. I want to connect with you. And then, like you said, there are people that don't want to meet it, right? They just
Right.
go, okay, thanks for sharing that with me. I'm not changing. I'm going to keep going the way that I'm going, and whatever that means to you doesn't matter. Or my
Hmm.
experience or your experience of me doesn't matter. Now that I'm processing this all out loud with you, Hailey, this is what I'm coming back to. I think what creates emotional safety in a relationship is to know that the other person is living with a perspective that says your experience of me matters. So
Wow.
let's say that I'm totally making up a situation, right? Let's say I text you a link to a trauma workshop, right? I love them, right? So let's
Hmm.
say I text you a link of a trauma workshop and I go, oh, hey, Hailey, I think you'd really like this. Okay. You get that text message, and what you hear, right? Not what I said, what you hear is Bridgett must think I'm really messed up. Like, she must judge me
Mm.
so hardcore. She must think that I had this thing happen to me. She must think I'm a terrible dater, whatever, whatever. So you have the
Hmm.
story in your head. So
Right.
you get really brave and you go, hey, Bridgett, I feel a little bit of fear bringing this to you. Can you help me process, the trauma workshop that you sent me? I assume this is not what you meant, but I felt really judged when you sent it to me. And I get to go, oh, Hailey, thank you so much for sharing with me, like, what was happening for you? And you tell me, you go, oh, well,
Mm.
I felt fear that you thought I was stupid or that I wasn't responsible. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hear that. Like, how would you like me to share things with you next time? And you go,
Mm.
oh, like, I think I would, I would love to have you share the link with me on Instagram so I can watch the promo video first so that I know what you're sending me before it's just like kind of
Mm.
in my phone. And we get to process through that compared to, right? If I if you were to share that with me and you were to say, oh, Bridgett, I felt hurt when you sent me that text message. And I was to be like, well, that wasn't my intention. Like I was not trying to be rude to you. I'm not really sure why you're upset about it. I was sending you because I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
helpful, right? Even like my tone changes as I'm getting defensive
Right.
in response.
Right.
And so if we can build, I know this is a really long answer, but if we can build relationships where we know that the other people in relationship with us are willing to come close and grow and change so that we can experience safety with them, like that's what we
Mm-hmm.
need. And we also want to
Right.
be that person,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And so that because that creates safety for us to say, hey, I'm not going to be able to do it, right? So you talked about like setting boundaries at work or at church or whatever in
Mm-hmm.
romantic relationships where you go, okay, this is what I need to feel loved, respected, and safe. And I'm unwilling to violate those needs.
Right.
What did that look like for you? That those, as you started to come out of a people-pleasing mindset and into a settling into Hailey, knowing who Hailey is, knowing what she needs. Obviously, we're all on a journey. Like it's not like, I haven't
Mm-hmm.
we haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
But when you started beginning to have conversations of, ooh, I actually think I need to say no to this person or no to this job,
Mm-hmm.
job request or no to this speaking experience or whatever. I think that's the most honoring thing. What was happening for you as you were like, ooh, people might be
Yeah.
upset?
Oh my gosh, that continues to be such a journey. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think because feels so uncomfortable, especially when you've always been the yes man or the yes girl,
Yep.
or that
Mm-hmm.
feels really uncomfortable. And for me, I just thank God for the people that He's put in my life to kind of help coach me through that and give me
Mm-hmm.
the language for that, because sometimes I could just be like, nope, not doing it, like bye, or like, read into things like you were saying exactly, like you start to tell that story in your head of like, well, this person must think this about me, and kind of to like remove myself from like so emotionally from all of these requests and things, and realize that they're going to keep coming. Like there's always going
Mm-hmm.
to be things to say yes or no to. So this isn't like this is something I have to learn how to deal with. So having people to help me, give me the language and the words to actually be able to communicate what I needed and why I needed to say no. I think it's also been a process, because if I was saying no, I would want the other person to really understand me and my
Yeah.
heart behind saying no.
Mm.
So then sometimes you kind of go into this over explaining of like, oh, I really want to do this, I feel this way. But it's because I want them to understand, because I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
upset them. So if I think that they understand me, then, maybe that'll make it less painful for me somehow.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, like I'm not responsible for, I could say no in the kindest, nicest, thoughtful way and be honoring myself, and they still might get upset. And that's not that's not necessarily on me, especially when we're not talking about someone who's willing to participate in that mutual respect, understanding, honoring kind of way. And I think I'm learning, that's where the discernment comes in, because I'm learning the relationships and the people that I want to kind of be in the ring with in that area, and
Yeah.
have a honest, realistic perspective of the times when, I just need to say no to this. I don't need to over explain. And, how I know how to communicate it in a respectful way and kind of just be done with it. Um, if it's someone who has more weight or stake in my life, then that's a little bit different. But even just learning how to kind of like categorize those experiences, and sometimes it'll
Mm-hmm.
be like a friend that you haven't talked to in years and they're selling their MLM thing and they want to get you on board. Like, sometimes just I don't think this is
Yeah.
for me, like is enough. You don't have, it's not your job to make this person feel okay. And so that's still people pleasing. That's still placating them, but it is a process for sure. So I think even now there's decisions that I need to make in my life that I'm processing all of
Mm-hmm.
these things about. And I'm grateful for the progress that I've made, but I'm continually reminded that it's still a journey.
Yeah. I love that. If you were
Mm.
to give advice to someone who's in a situation where they're terrified that if they break out of their people pleasing model that they've lived with, that it's going to cost them a deep level of disconnection that it might end a
Mm.
relationship. It might cost them a job or a friendship or a dynamic that they've, been used to. They feel it in their gut. They're like, yeah, I really do think that I need to be brave and share what I need, but I'm terrified of what's going to be on the other side. What would you say to those people?
I would just say, like, it's gonna be okay. Like, you are going to be okay. And think of like the long term, like where do you really want to be? And like if you're so worried about it, you probably like this probably isn't a place where you really feel safe enough to be who you are. And so
Mm,
it's okay. It's okay if they don't respond in the same way, and it's okay to let those things go or even let a relationship go. I know that's really painful and it's hard, and you're allowed to feel those feelings and process the grief that comes with that. But you feel this way, like you know in your knower that this is not right. So
mhm.
this is like the step that you need to take, and I promise you you're going to be okay. And sometimes we have to allow God to make room in our lives for the right people and the right things, and to just keep going, like just take it one step at a time, one day at a time, and you're okay and you're loved and you're seen, and the right people are going to align with that.
Yeah, I love that. For
Mm.
you, what has been, we'll kind of end on this as we wrap up. For you, what has been the gift of choosing to love yourself and others really well by being really honest about what you want and need?
I think I have more peace than I've ever had before. And I have just more peace of mind. Like I don't have the anxious thoughts running through my head 24/7 like I did when I was, so actively people pleasing. So I think that piece is huge. That's enough. I think I have a new ability to be able to just enjoy the mundane things of life, which were never enjoyable to me when I was constantly striving and working. And just being able to enjoy every moment of life and be present, that's also huge. And the last thing I think is just the quality of relationships that I have in my life that
Mm,
feel
absolutely.
aligned and that are like that's everything. And I think the shift was definitely like people actually want me to be myself, and
Hmm.
they love like Hailey's love, like they love Hailey. And the rich friendships and relationships that I have out of that space, out of who I truly am, even if it's just a couple, are worth it.
Mm, I love that. That's so
Mm-hmm.
good. Such a great place to end our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
Hailey, thanks for making space to come hang out with the Recover Your Life crew. Our hope and dream is that this conversation would give you the tools and resources to start conversations with your crew, your people, to be able to say, hey, like, what would it look like for us to be men and women who are really brave about what we need, what we want, what we dream of to build really authentic, connected relationships and in turn live the life that God called us to live. So feel free to
Mm-hmm.
reach out over Instagram. We're at Recover Your Life, and we'll see you next time.